Hey everybody, it's Dan Scott here, and what you see on the screen is a chart that I put together where, as we'll see, making distinctions between these two words is quite profound, very important. So here on the left is the Greek noun ariston, and on the right the noun deipnon, where the common rendering of ariston in the King James and many other translations is simply dinner, where here we see the DLT translates it as early meal, showing us the profound distinction between early meal and supper, where confusion is brought in due to the lack of clarity in defining these words.
Now here, when you consult the English definitions of these words, dinner and supper, we see dinner states an evening meal, but synonymous with supper. Supper is defined as an evening meal, synonymous with dinner. So understand, in the Word of God, there are specific distinctions made, which are very important for us to recognize.
Now, in this video, I want to focus primarily on early meal. So as for early meal, the first occurrence, which is a verb, is found in the parable of the wedding feasts. And in the various dispatching of slaves, the timeline leads from early meal to those who are lying up in the context of the supper. We see that according to the invitation into the early meal, those uncaring do not partake of early meal. And of course, wedding feast points us back to the parable of the 10 virgins, which the timeline that is given according to those who enter the wedding feasts and those locked out is the middle of the night. So simply stated, those who partake of the early meal or the midday meal, they enter the wedding feasts in the middle of the night. And those locked out will be according to the eating and the drinking into the supper of the third watch time.
Now, before we dig into these occurrences of early meal, let me also interject here that all of this to do with meals, okay, the eating and the drinking has to do with the food that Jesus stated is according to the will of the one sending him, who's the Father, into the accomplishing of the work, which is the land work of bringing in the all in all back to the Father, which the eating and drinking also relates to the cup of blessing. Okay, the bread, the one bread, the blood of Christ, and all concerning his body.
Now understand, we who are having communion of the blood and the body worthily, let me clarify, worthily, are still partaking of early meal, because the Lord has not yet returned to uploosen those into the first watch time and then lead the sober-minded into the door of the wedding feast in the middle of the night. And if you haven't already watched my video, The Pre-Expectancy, understand that during the Acts of the Apostles, there was a time when they were expecting the Lord's return in their lifetime. So those of the outcalled who were partaking of the Lord worthily, they were partaking of early meal in their pre-expectancy of the Lord to come into the event of the middle of the night.
So again, let me emphasize, according to the pre-expectation was the partaking of early meal, the communion, the food, the land work, which at present it's the same. We're still according to early meal, according to taking the communion of the Lord, according to the blissful expectation and the unloosening of first watch time into the unloosening of all who will be entering in the middle of the night.
According to the eating and the drinking in the communion worthily, because those who are not partaking worthily will have to do so into the supper, where again, it's not my intention to go into detail talking about supper, but I think it's important that we consider Paul's use of the word supper, all found in the first epistle to the Corinthians. So the context surrounding these verses concerns an admonition to the outcalled, where when they were coming together to eat and drink, not as ones partaking of the supper or the later meal, but the eating and the drinking, according to the pre-expectation, the early meal. The context of supper here is into a diminishing, which Paul contrasts to the better. And the diminishing was due to schisms below origin beginning in the outcalled, as well as the mention of sects, which are divisions where the approved points to the better. They enter the wedding feasts in the middle of the night. So here, when we read hence, when you come together on the same points to the coming together into the diminishing of verse 17, which would be the supper, the later meal. Now next, here in John 21, Jesus is inviting them, have early meal with me. But as we'll see, the context of the uncaring pertains to Peter.
So Peter, as we'll soon see, represents those according to the parable of the wedding who are uncaring about it. Okay? Jesus is inviting to partake of the meal, and people are gathered around eating and drinking, but not all are doing so worthily.
So here in John 21:12, we find the verb, have early meal with me, where in verse 15, they were having early meal, where this is when Jesus is asking Peter, do you love me? And that the Lord asked Peter 3 times is profound, because remember, Peter also denies the Lord thrice, with the sign of the cock's voice, where when we back up to verse 14, we read it was already the 3rd time that Jesus, as having been awakened out of died ones, was revealed to the learning ones. And where we see Peter bear, Peter's lack of being girded points to the parable of the unusable slave, where the one and only occurrence of the verb sup is found. But the point is that Peter's being found bare is the not being girded, which will have to be done so into the 3rd watch time, where also the dragging of the net with the fishes in the great fish points to the parable of Matthew 13:47 and the dragnet. So here in John 21, when they were having early meal, the 3rd questioning of Jesus is not, do you love me, but do you befriend me? Where, as I'll show you in another video, the word befriend is in a word family, also translated kiss, which can be represented in a holy kiss or the kiss of betrayal. And of course, the kiss of betrayal points us to Judas, who Jesus terms comrade, where in the parable of the inviting to the wedding feasts, the one who is bound hands and feet is also termed comrade. So the point is that we see these profound dots that connect from the having early meal that leads to a diminishing, which we know that the diminishing is into the supper of the 3rd watch time, which now brings us to the next 2 occurrences of early meal, where one again is a verb and one is a noun, which is seen here in Luke chapter 11. Where in my video called The Kingdom Within, we talked about some of these verses concerning the outer and the inner cleansing, which also has its relationship to the communion. So here, one Pharisee is asking the Lord so that he may have early meal by with him, the him being the Pharisee. And having come in, he sat down. But this is not an indication that this Pharisee is set into early meal, just as Peter. Now, the word sat down here is found in Luke 22:14 in relationship to the bread for the up-reminding and the cup of the covenant, in relationship to the Passover. So the Pharisee who sat down points to the completion concerning the Passover, where the partaking of the cup, the covenant, and the bread will be into the supper. And here the marveling of the Pharisee concerning the not baptizing before early meal also indicates the same. This one is only perceiving the ritual cleansing according to law, in contrast to the cleansing of her, the outcalled in the bath of the water in talk, the talk of the faithing, which faithing is not out of law. So Jesus closes by saying, whereas give as alms, mercy gifts, the things being within, hence the regency is within you according to expectation of faithing, and perceive all is clean to you. So there's a bit of militant irony here that the Pharisee is asking the Lord to have early meal with him when Jesus is parabolically pointing him to the supper. And also perceive that even though Jesus spoke woes to the Pharisees concerning the curse, here is an example of the salvation according to the under remnant of Israel, again, who will be according to the dragging along ones. Now, in the last occurrence of early meal, we see here where Jesus gives instructions to both those being invitingly called as guests, but others who are hosts doing the invitingly calling. Where remember, we are still according to the early meal at present. However, the instructions given according to early meal or supper are all the same. Which context of such instructions carries into the completion of the Christ for all who will be found lying up to supper, where those who have not on the slippable raiment of the wedding points to comrade, which I think will be the context of my next video, leading into yet another video talking about the slippable raiment of wedding, as to what exactly it represents for all of us, whether it's according to the partaking of early meal or supper.
So, now that we are perceiving the distinction between early meal and supper, let's pursue into that which is better, not into that which is a diminishing. And better yet, we can even now pursue into that which is much, much more better according to Paul's own pursuit into what is termed the out-resurrection, which is an up-loosening into the first watch time, in contrast to others who will be unloosened and led into the wedding feast in the middle of the night.